Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things, and welcome to another video, and today I'm going to be telling you about all the books that I read in the month of June. Before I talk about the books that I read in June, I did want to spend a little bit of time talking about Alice from Alice and the Giant Bookshelf. I think probably quite a few people who watch my channel watched hers and will have seen by now the post that her husband put up on her channel saying that Alice very sadly passed away in June. I pre-film quite a lot of my videos, so this is the first video I'm filming since that news was public. I did know about it beforehand, but yeah, it felt weird not to talk about Alice at all on my channel. I've been watching Alice's videos for a really long time. I have been subscribed to her since the very beginning of her channel. The first video she ever put up back in 2021 was a TBR for the 1900 to 1950 readathon, which I was hosting that year. And I remember watching her TBR video and just immediately loving her channel. And I've just really loved it ever since. I really, really love her videos. I think she was so clever and fun and just such a joy to watch, and her videos brought me so much pleasure. I also got to meet her a few times in the last couple of years. She came along to my book launch last year, and I've met her at a few booktuber meetups that we'd had in the last couple of years, and that was really, really lovely. And I just really liked her, and I really liked her videos, and I'm really sad. So I felt like that should be said, because I know a lot of you who watch my channel probably watch hers too. And if you didn't, I put up a list on my community thing, posts on YouTube with some of my favourite videos of hers, so I'll leave them linked down below in the description as well in case you want to go and watch them, because you know her amazing videos are still there, and it's really sad to think she won't put up anymore, but she made a lot of great content, made a lot of people smile on YouTube, and my thoughts are really with her family. I know her mum watches BookTube and is part of our community as a viewer as well, and also, you know, I've been thinking a lot about the kind of Waffle Girls group of booktubers who I know are just all really, really close to Alice, so I know that must be very hard, and I'm thinking about them a lot. So anyway, I will go on and talk about books as always, because that is what we do here, and books are always a comfort for me, and I think for everyone, probably who is on BookTube, but yeah, I just felt like it would be weird not to talk about Alice on this channel because she's such a massive loss to the BookTube community, and especially the bit of the BookTube community I'm in. Okay, let's talk about books that I read in June instead, because June was a bit of a weird reading month. I read 9 books, but more than half of them were on audiobook. I didn't read very much physically in June. I just had a really busy month and I didn't have very much time to sit down and read. In fact, having said I read 9 books in June, I think 3 of these I actually finished on the 1st of July, but you know, they weren't Jane Austen July reads, so I thought I would just talk about them in my June wrap up anyway. So we'll start off with some classics, and one thing that I read in June was Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. So Great Expectations was the Mega Dickens read-along pick for June, and I listened to this on audiobook, to the audiobook narrated by Martin Jarvis, and I really, really loved this. It was such a great reread. I love Great Expectations, and I feel like it's one of those Dickens books that really goes up in my estimation whenever I read it, and just I will find myself loving it more. I will film a longer spoilery video, you know, half an hour, 45 minutes long, talking about all my thoughts about Great Expectations at some point in the next few weeks when I manage to gather all my thoughts together. But here I will just say that I thought it was fantastic, and it was such a joy and pleasure to reread this. I ended up listening to a lot of it while driving, and I ended up listening to most of the second half of the book on one long drive, and it was really, really nice to just have Dickens for company on a long drive. So Great Expectations, if you don't know, it is the coming of age story of a boy and young man called Pip. Pip comes from a working class background. He is growing up expecting to be a blacksmith. He's apprenticed to his brother-in-law who is a blacksmith, but one day he is told that he has great expectations and is going to be a gentleman. So this book is kind of all about class and social mobility, and it's kind of Pip's coming of age story, and Pip's character arc, I guess. And I just think there are so many fantastic things about Great Expectations. I think it's so atmospheric, the twists and turns of the plot are so good, the characterization is wonderful, there's so many characters I love, especially thinking like Herbert Pocket and Mr. Wemmick, but I really enjoy Mr. Jaggers too, Miss Havisham, Stella's really great, and Pip himself is a really, really interesting character. I think he used to frustrate me a lot when I was younger, but now that I am older than Pip rather than Pip's age, I feel like I have a lot more like sympathy for his youth and inexperience and the mistakes that he makes in a way that I just didn't when I was Pip's age myself. But I just really enjoyed Great Expectations, and I really loved listening to it on audiobook. And yeah, I need to gather all my thoughts together and make a long video, but I just thought it was fantastic. I think it is one of Dickens's best. I do understand why it is so famous. Like, I feel like in general, Dickens's most famous books don't tend to be the ones that I think are his best. Like Oliver Twist and A Tale of Two Cities are two of his most famous books, and I just think there are a lot of other Dickens books I prefer, whereas Great Expectations, okay, it's not like it wouldn't be in my top 4, but it would be somewhere around the 5 or 6 mark, I think. It is a fantastic book, and I do know why it is so loved, and I think it's amazing. So I do really recommend Great Expectations, and it was such a joy to reread it in June. And then I also read some French 19th century short stories, this little collection called Femme Fatale by Guy de Maupassant. So in this little Penguin Black Classic, there are 4 short stories from the 1880s, and I don't really know what I thought of these. I feel like most of these stories left me feeling a bit confused and not really sure what I was meant to take away from them. Sometimes short stories are meant to be ambiguous, and that can be really interesting to think about and discuss, but I mostly just felt a bit confused by these. I feel like there were 2 stories that I just feel like I didn't get anything from, Cockcrow and Laid to Rest. And then Houghton and Son and Femme Fatale I found much more interesting, but I also didn't fully get what I was meant to take away from them. Femme Fatale is probably the most interesting story in this, and it's quite interesting because it's published in the 1880s, but it has really like direct and explicit discussion of lesbian relationships. So I found that really interesting, but also I didn't really know what the story was trying to say, and there were some bits of the story that kind of frustrated me. Maybe that was the point, I don't know. So basically I sort of found these stories interesting but also really confusing, and I don't know if that was just because they are quite ambiguous stories that you can take lots of different things from, or whether that was just because I was having a general not a great month in June and was feeling quite like reading slumpy, and I don't know if I was being like as focused or analytical as I might usually be, so I don't know. And then while I'm talking about classics, I did also want to say that I made quite a bit of progress with Vanya the Vampire this month. I started this book back in February. I actually started reading it after the death of Jennifer Brooks, another booktuber, because this was her favourite Victorian book. I feel like it's been a pretty tough year for my corner of BookTube, but I started reading this because I know Jennifer Brooks loved it so much, and I am really, really loving it, but it is really massive and sort of physically massive, so you know, this is not a book I'm taking about in my bag with me if I'm leaving the house. So I didn't finish this in June, but I am now actually about halfway through the first volume, and I did make quite a bit of progress with this. I'm going to probably leave it to the side in July and focus on Jane Austen July, but hopefully in August and September I will pick this back up and hopefully finish it come Victober. I am really, really enjoying this. It's a really good, fun Victorian penny dreadful about a vampire called Vanya and all the people who are afraid of him. It's delightfully silly and very, very Victorian. There's some wonderful moments where the characters are like, but Sir Francis Vanya couldn't possibly be a vampire because he's too much of a gentleman, and it's just very, very Victorian in this lovely, delightful way. So I'm really, really enjoying it, and I did make some progress, but yes, I still have quite a long way to go in this one. So those are the classics that I was reading in June, and then I read quite a few new releases. In fact, I read 2 very, very new releases, by which I mean they haven't yet come out and they're coming out in August. So the first of those that I read was The Cafe on Manor Lane by Emilia Kwese, and this is a sort of dual timeline novel with one timeline taking place in the 1950s and one in the present day, and it's all about South East London and a particular cafe in South East London and how it affects different people in different generations. So in the 1950s we're following the love story of 2 people who have come from elsewhere and made their home in London. Bella is a French Jewish woman who has come to the UK after the Second World War, and she meets and falls in love with a Nigerian doctor. And then in 2010, so I think I said the present day, but it's actually 2010. In 2010, we're following a young woman, Gina, who is working at a cafe. She's in her very early 20s. She's got a difficult relationship with her boyfriend. She's doing a lot of caring for her grandmother, and she's trying to work out what her future holds and where she sees her kind of artistic ambitions going. And we're basically following these two different plot lines in two different times, how they relate to each other, and how they kind of all focus on this cafe and on this corner of London. It was so lovely to read this book. I know Amelia in real life, and I had actually read a much earlier version of this book years ago, and it was really nice to read the finished final version, which is being published in August from One More Chapter, who very kindly sent me a digital review copy, and it was so nice to enter this world again. I think what I really love about the cafe on Manor Lane is that it is a real love letter to London, and also specifically to kind of southeast London, and I also love the characterization, and I just really like the way Amelia writes. She's got a great like turn of phrase and way of capturing characters really succinctly, so I just really enjoyed that one, and it's definitely one I'd recommend. Like I said, that comes out in August. And then I also read The Air of Venus by Laura Shepard. This is another book that comes out in August. This one is being published by Sphere, who are part of Little Brown, and I read Laura Shepard's debut novel, The Heroines, a few months ago, earlier this year, and I really loved that, so I was very excited to pick up her second book, The Air of Venus, and I thought this was fantastic too. So this is kind of a Greek myth retelling slash reimagining, dealing with the story of Aeneas, who prominently features in the Iliad, as well as other stories. I'll read actually what Laura writes in her author's note, because I thought it was quite a good way of like explaining the premise of the book. The Air of Venus is not a retelling of the Iliad. Rather, it is a retelling of the story of Aeneas, whose story can be found in the works of several ancient authors. So this book is sort of the story of Aeneas, but really it's the story of three very important women who featured in Aeneas's life and whose lives were really affected by Aeneas. So this book has sort of three different timelines, one following Creusa, who met Aeneas and fell in love with him when they were very young, and we're following her kind of in the run-up to and during the Trojan War. And then we're also following Dido, who Aeneas met after the Trojan War. And then we're also following a young woman called Lavinia, who even further after the Trojan War meets and becomes engaged to Aeneas, and their engagement ends up prompting another war. So this book is very much about kind of war and marriage and relationships, and to what extent these women have power and control over their own destinies. I thought it was really fantastic. I just really love the way Laura writes. Her writing is so like readable and compelling and engaging, and I feel like, especially as I said, I feel like I wasn't having a very good reading month, and I didn't read that much in June, and I ended up actually reading like 2/3 of this on the 1st of July, and it was just so smooth to get through, and it was just the book I needed, and I thought it was fantastically done. So I really recommend The Air of Venus. I thought it was fantastic. And then the other thing I read physically in June was this. It is Wandering Souls by Cecile Pinn, and this is a novel I've heard such amazing things about and been meaning to read for a while, so it was exciting to pick this up in June. And this is the story of three siblings who leave Vietnam shortly after the Vietnam War in search of a better life. Their parents and siblings are meant to follow them, but the rest of their family end up dying on the way. These siblings spend a long time in refugee camps before eventually relocating to London, and this book follows them over a number of decades, looking at their lives and their efforts to make a new home and a new life for themselves. But this book also has some unusual elements to it, because we also have some sort of like blog posts, I guess, but we don't really know who's writing them, and we also have the perspective of the ghosts of one of their younger brothers who is watching them. I thought this was really great. There were a lot of really interesting elements in this. It's a really powerful, moving novel that just worked really well for me. I kind of do wish it had been longer. Like, we follow these characters over quite a long period of time, so we're quite sort of zoomed out in a way, and I would have loved this book to be like twice the length. But I think it was just aiming for a slightly different thing. I think it was kind of setting out to give a sort of bigger overarching narrative rather than like zooming in on one moment in a person's life. And I thought it did that zoomed out narrative really well. So I'd really recommend this. A very powerful novel. And yeah, I thought it was really good. And then the other 4 books that I read in June were all audiobooks. So I listened to Book Lovers by Emily Henry, which was fantastic and such a joy. I really, really love Emily Henry. This is the 2nd book I've read by her. I read You and Me on Vacation last year, I think. And I just think she's a fantastic, fantastic writer. And this was such a pleasure to listen to. I listened to most of it while doing baking, which was just lovely. So Book Lovers tells a story of a literary agent called Nora, who is going away on holiday with her sister Libby. Her sister is partway through her 3rd pregnancy, and Nora is just getting the sense that things aren't quite right with Libby, but maybe she's not really happy, and Nora feels like this trip could be a really good chance for them to reconnect. But while she is on this trip, she also encounters her sort of professional nemesis, an editor called Charlie, who she's had run-ins with in the past. And there's like a vague enemies to lovers feeling between Charlie and Nora, although it becomes clear pretty early on that they don't dislike each other at all, and that there are many more complicated things going on. I feel like the thing I really like about Emily Henry's books is that she has a really like fantastic balance of romance and everything else, and while the love story is really important in this book, also the like sister sibling story is hugely important, and I found the relationship between Nora and Libby just really believable, really complex, really, really well examined, and I also thought the love story was great, and it was also funny and delightful and charming, and all the like details about books and the book world and agenting and editing were just really fun as well. So I really recommend Book Lovers. Excellent one. Yeah, I definitely need to read more by Emily Henry. I just think she is a fantastic, fantastic writer, and I'm excited that there are so many more books by her that I have to read. I read a couple of sort of crime mystery books in June as well. So one book I read was How to Solve Your Own Murder by Kristen Perrin. I started reading this physically, and then I ended up switching to the audiobook just because, as I said, I was not having a good time reading physically in June, and I ended up getting through it much faster on audiobook and finishing it at the very beginning of July, but you know, we'll count it in my June wrap-up anyway. I was buddy reading this with Carolyn from Carolyn's Reading Ramblings, which was really fun. I feel like I wasn't a very good buddy reader because I was reading it very slowly, but it was really nice to buddy read together because we haven't buddy read for a while. How to Solve Your Own Murder is a kind of cozy crime novel, mostly set in the present day, but also with a strand set in the 1960s. So in the 1960s, a woman called Frances was given this fortune at a fair that told her that she would one day be murdered, and ever since then she has kind of been obsessed with the idea that she's going to be murdered. And so in the present day, we're following her great niece Annie, who has been summoned to the home of a great aunt she's never met, only to find that her great aunt has been murdered, and that Annie and someone else need to compete to solve the murder in order to win Frances's inheritance. So in the present day, we're kind of following them solving that murder mystery, and then in the 1960s, we're also following Frances and her friends kind of in the year after her fortune was told, and in the wake of a disappearance of one of her closest friends. I thought this was such a fun mystery, and I especially loved the 1960s strand. I just really, really enjoyed those sections of Frances's diary and kind of learning more about her as a person, and the kind of way the 1960s and the present day stuff tied together was just really well done and worked very well for me. I also really liked Annie as a character. I thought she was fantastically done, and overall this was just such a fun read. So definitely one I would recommend. Really fun premise, good mystery, and just a thoroughly enjoyable read. And then I also listened to Strange Sally Diamond by Liz Nugent. This was a really fantastic, powerful, raw, sort of heart-wrenching, very upsetting novel. I thought it was absolutely fantastic, but I also feel like it was very, very hard-hitting and difficult, and I feel like it's probably one to check trigger warnings for and that kind of thing, because it is very upsetting. If YouTube lets me without censoring things, I will leave trigger warnings in the description for this book, just because I do think it's worth being aware of some of the very, very difficult things that take place in this book. It was quite like upsetting and hard to listen to, but I do think it was fantastic. So Strange Sally Diamond follows a woman called Sally. She is in her 40s when her father dies, and Sally has always known that she is a bit different from everyone else, and her father has always told her not to worry about that. She has also always known that she was adopted and that she has no memories before her 7th birthday. And after the death of her adoptive father, things start to come out about what may have happened to Sally in the first few years of her life, who her parents were, and how her early experiences may have affected how Sally is as a person. And shortly after this, a mysterious package arrives at Sally's house containing something that she somehow remembers from the years that she has lost. And this book ends up having kind of two strands. I feel like I read a lot of dual narrative things this month, actually. It has a strand where we're following Sally kind of in the present, and also a strand following another character looking at the past. It is a crime novel, but it also is very much an aftermath novel and a book about trauma and people attempting to recover from trauma and the extent to which it is possible to recover from trauma. I thought it was so fantastic. Like, the characterization is amazing, and Sally Diamond as a character was just so fully developed and so complex and so well done, and I loved so many elements of this book and her story. This is a book that I've seen up for lots of prizes and so on, and I completely understand why. I think it is truly fantastic. As I said, it is exceptionally hard-hitting. Like, it's a really tough read, but it is also really, really good. And if you can, like, bear to read about, like, horrible things happening to people, then it is worth your time, but it is quite difficult. So I think that's worth being aware of. I also don't know that I loved the ending, by which I mean I thought the ending was fantastic, but I wanted a different ending, but I also feel like the ending probably was the right ending for the book. It's kind of hard to explain what I mean without spoilers, which I don't want to give, but I do think it was really fantastic and I definitely recommend it. And yeah, like I said, I'll put some trigger warnings in the description just so people are aware. And then finally, the other book that I listened to in June was The Square of Sevens by Laura Shepard Robinson, which was fantastic and probably my highlight of the month. The Square of Sevens is this amazing twisty-turny historical adventure. The main kind of body of the narrative is told from the perspective of a character called Red, and Red tells us about her life, her growing up with her father, who was a fortune teller, travelling on the road, not really knowing anything about her mother, being adopted by a wealthy man after her father's death, and her struggles to find out about her mother's family and where she came from, and how that ends up leading her into various dangerous situations. And meanwhile, we're also following a man called Lazarus Dark, what a great name, who is trying to unpick certain things that happened in the past for a legal case and ends up crossing paths with Red. It is such a fantastic book. I thought The Square of Sevens was so good, and just, I don't even know how to explain how good it was, because there are so many elements of it, and I feel like you don't want to know too much about it before you start, because I didn't really know anything about it before I started reading it, and the kind of joy of how everything unfolds was just part of the great pleasure of reading this book. The characterization is amazing and complex and fantastic. The writing is so rich. The plot is so pacey. I don't think I said that it's set in the 18th century, and I feel like that historical setting is done so well. I loved how the plot had kind of coming of age story elements and sort of legal drama elements, crime story elements, mystery elements. There was so much going on in the plot, and it was also fantastically done. I feel like if you enjoy Wilkie Collins and Charles Dickens, or if you enjoy Sarah Waters, then you will really, really love The Square of Sevens. It was just so good, and I'm so pleased that I read it this month because I thought it was fantastic. I'm so excited to read more by Laura Shepard Robinson. I think she has 2 other books out and I haven't read either of them, so I'm really looking forward to reading them in the future. And yeah, I just thought it was so fantastic, so that was a real highlight of the month. So there we go, those are the things that I read in June. I don't think I have anything else to say, but do let me know down in the comments if you read any of these books and what you thought of them. I know this has been, you know, a more somber video than usual, but it felt really weird not to sort of mention Alice, because, you know, she was such a big part of our community, and I do feel, you know, hit by her loss. Okay, I don't think I have anything else to say, so thanks very much for watching, and I'll be back very soon with another bookish video.